Prestige Mind Collections presents this audiobook, The Unspoken Truth About Finding Your Path, from people who did it. Introduction: The Call to Adventure. Have you ever truly felt the weight of that one giant question? Does it feel less like a gentle inquiry and more like a heavy blanket that settles on you in the quiet moments, making it hard to breathe? Is it the unwelcome guest that arrives on a quiet Sunday evening, just as the freedom of the weekend dissolves into the cold reality of Monday? Is it the ghost in the room when you're at a job that pays the bills but slowly starves your very spirit? Is it the silent scream you feel when you scroll through the highlight reels of other people's lives, their promotions, their engagements, their seemingly perfect, linear adventures? Do you feel an immense, crushing pressure to have it all figured out, to possess a single, elegant mission statement for your entire existence? Does this pressure leave you feeling fundamentally behind everyone else, as if you missed the day they handed out the instruction manual for life? What if this feeling of being lost is not a personal failure? What if it's actually a summons, a powerful call to adventure from the deepest part of yourself, telling you that you have outgrown your current story? Why have we been sold the lie that purpose arrives like a lightning bolt, when for most, it is quietly built, stone by stone? How can you find your way when every map you've been given seems to lead to someone else's destination? Could it be that the greatest secret to a well-lived life is hidden not in the polished biographies of our heroes, but in the messy, unedited truth of their struggles? Consider that the world's most remarkable people, from Steve Jobs to Walt Disney, once felt as lost as you do now. Know that their genius wasn't in having a perfect plan, but in their courage to navigate the fog without a map. Understand that their paths were not straight lines, but chaotic scribbles of failure, resilience, and accidental discovery. Imagine what you could learn, not from their final successes, but from their bad beginnings and their artful stumbles. Picture yourself being handed the keys to their real journeys, the unspoken truths that are never included in the highlight reels. Prepare to dismantle the myths of passion, purpose, and planning that have kept you paralyzed for so long. See how we will uncover the powerful, counterintuitive patterns that connect the lives of the world's greatest creators and innovators. Discover that you do not need to find your passion, but merely follow your curiosity. Realize that you do not need a destination, but a compass built from your own core values. Accept that you do not need a grand plan, but the courage to run small, imperfect experiments. Learn that you do not need to be good to start, but that you must start to ever become good. Let this be the moment you stop waiting for your life to begin and recognize that you are, and always have been, the one who creates it. Will you now choose to be the author of your days? How will you walk differently tomorrow, knowing these truths? What is the one, small, imperfect step you will take when this audio ends? Do not mistake the trembling in your hands for weakness, it is the raw feeling of your own power returning. Look down at your feet, feel the solid ground beneath you, and know with every fiber of your being that you are ready. Before we begin this journey into the unspoken truth, I have a small but powerful invitation for you. If you are listening to this because you are ready for a change, ready to feel more grounded and hopeful, there are 3 ways you can amplify this journey, both for yourself and for others. First, like or rate this audiobook. Think of your like or your 5-star rating not as just a number, but as a quiet signal you are sending out into the world. It's a flare that helps this message cut through the noise and find its way to others who are sitting in the fog right now, waiting for a little light. It is your way of saying, there is something of value here. Second, subscribe or follow. This journey can feel isolating, but it doesn't have to be. By hitting that subscribe or follow button, you are joining a community of fellow walkers. You are creating a space you can return to whenever you need to recalibrate your compass, ensuring you never have to walk this path alone. And finally, share this with one person. If a specific person came to mind as you were listening, a friend, a family member, someone you care about who is wrestling with these same questions, please share this with them. To reach out and say, "I was thinking of you, and I thought this might help," is one of the most powerful acts of connection we can offer one another. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1: The Weight of the Question, featuring Henry Ford. Imagine, for a moment, the immense pressure of a life built on a single word. Consider the power of the question every child is asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Think about how that question teaches us, from our earliest days, to search for a noun. See how we are trained to hunt for a job title, a static identity, a label that we believe will finally make us feel complete. What if this entire search is the very reason you feel lost? What if the secret to a vibrant life isn't about finding the right noun at all? Let's dismantle the idea that you are a single, static thing. Let's explore the revolutionary truth that a fulfilling life is about discovering your verbs. Can you feel the profound difference in that single shift? A noun is a destination, an engineer, a doctor, a manager, a lawyer. But a verb is the energy of the journey itself, to build, to heal, to lead, to argue. Dare to ask yourself not what you want to be, but what you love to do. Picture the person you admire most. Do you admire their title, or do you admire the actions they take every day? Now, think about your own life, right now. Is it defined by a noun that looks impressive on paper but feels hollow in your heart? Could it be that the persistent ache you feel is the cry of a verb that is being ignored? What if the greatest moments in history were born when someone had the courage to abandon a perfectly good noun for a wild, uncertain verb? When might you have to make a similar choice? How can you find the courage to listen to a call that defies all logic? Let me tell you a story that powerfully illustrates this choice between a comfortable noun and a world-changing verb. Let's journey back to the end of the 19th century, to the burgeoning industrial hub of Detroit, Michigan. Can you picture a young man there who had already climbed the ladder of success? See him in his mid-30s, a man named Henry Ford, holding one of the most respected technical jobs in the entire city. Recognize the power and security of his noun, chief engineer of the Edison Illuminating Company. Acknowledge the incredible prestige of this role. He was personally responsible for keeping the electricity running for all of Detroit, working for a company founded by his personal hero, Thomas Edison. Understand that with a salary of $100 a month, an excellent wage for the time, he had a comfortable home, a wife, Clara, and a young son, Edsel. He had, by every conventional measure, made it. He was living a life of security, status, and predictability. But can you also sense the deep, mechanical hum beneath this placid surface? This is the story of a man who held a golden noun only to discover his true verb was waiting for him after dark, in a small brick shed behind his house. Henry Ford was exceptionally good at his job. He was on call 24 hours a day, a master of the complex dynamos that powered a modern city. He understood the world of electricity, the dominant, world-changing technology of his era. His path was clear: continue his rise within the Edison Company, becoming a leader in the electrical industry. But that path, as bright and well-lit as the city he powered, was not the one that captivated his soul. His true life began only after his long shifts ended. While the city of Detroit slept under the steady glow he provided, Ford would walk out to a humble shed he had built. There, under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, he became a different man. He was not an employee. He was not the chief engineer. In that shed, surrounded by tools, grease, and the radical scent of gasoline, he was a creator. His verb, the action that set his mind on fire, was to build. He was obsessed with a noisy, greasy, and still unproven piece of technology, the internal combustion engine. For years, this was his secret life. He would tinker late into the night, sometimes begging his wife Clara to hold the lamp as he worked on his contraption. He was building what he called a quadricycle, a simple frame with 4 bicycle wheels, powered by his homemade gasoline engine. This was not a hobby. A hobby is a diversion. This was a calling. It was the purest expression of his being. The Noun chief engineer paid his bills, but the verb to build made him feel alive. He wasn't trying to get rich, he was trying to solve a puzzle that fascinated him more than anything else in the world. The conflict between his 2 lives was immense. The world, and more importantly, his employer, was betting on electricity. The gasoline engine was seen by many as a dirty, dangerous, and impractical novelty, a toy for the wealthy at best. His safe, respectable noun was tied to one future, while his passionate, all-consuming verb was tied to another, far more uncertain one. The moment of truth arrived in 1896 at a convention in New York. As a distinguished employee, Ford was in attendance and, to his astonishment, was introduced to the great Thomas Edison himself. Imagine the scene, a young, nervous engineer meeting his childhood idol, the most famous inventor on the planet. In that moment, he had a choice. He could talk about his work in electricity, cementing his status as a valuable employee. Or he could risk it all and talk about his secret passion. He chose the verb. He nervously explained his gasoline engine, sketching out the design on the back of a menu. Edison, the champion of electricity, listened intently. Instead of dismissing the rival technology, Edison saw the spark of genius. He famously banged his fist on the table and said, "Young man, that's the thing. You have it. Keep at it." That validation from his hero was a turning point. But it also clarified his impossible choice. He could not keep at it and remain the chief engineer. The company needed his full attention on electricity. He was at a crossroads so many of us face, the choice between the path of security and the path of authenticity. His noun offered him a comfortable life. His verb offered him a chance to build the future he envisioned, but with an enormous risk of failure, poverty, and ridicule. For 3 more years, he wrestled with this decision. He had a family to support. He was abandoning a guaranteed career. But the engine in his shed was a promise, and the call to build was relentless. In 1899, he made the choice that would define his legacy and reshape the world. He resigned from his position as chief engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company. Think about that act of courage. He willingly traded the powerful noun chief engineer for the vague, penniless noun inventor. From the outside, it was an act of professional suicide. He was walking away from a perfect life. But on the inside, it was the first day of his real life. It was a profound act of alignment, a declaration that his existence would be defined not by the job he held, but by the work he was destined to do. His story is the ultimate lesson in the power of verbs over nouns. It's not just a story about the automobile, it's a story about the immense courage it takes to listen to an internal call that defies all external logic. It is proof that the most fulfilling paths are often the ones that look the most foolish at the beginning. So I ask you again, what is your verb? Look past your job title, past your resume, past the expectations of others. What is the action that ignites a fire in you? What is the process that makes you lose all track of time? Is it to design, to nurture, to simplify, to empower, to discover, to advocate? Like Henry Ford in his brick shed, your verb is waiting for your attention, often after the duties of your noun are done for the day. It is the first, most powerful clue you have. The weight of the question, "What should I do with my life?" begins to feel lighter the very moment you stop searching for a noun and start, instead, to live your verb. Chapter 2, The Myth of the Map, featuring Colonel Sanders and Vera Wang. Have you ever found yourself scrolling through the lives of others, a silent observer in a gallery of filtered perfection? Do you ever see a former classmate who is now a doctor, just as they confidently declared they would be in high school? Have you witnessed a friend methodically climb the corporate ladder, each promotion announced with a polished, confident post? Do you see people buying houses, starting families, and running marathons, their lives appearing as neat and orderly as a printed itinerary? Why is it so easy to believe that they are all working from a secret blueprint? What is this powerful, painful illusion that successful, happy people are following a pre-drawn route, and that you are the only one wandering aimlessly in the wilderness? How does this myth create such a vast and painful gap between your messy, uncertain reality and their curated, highlight reel lives? Consider for a moment that this myth is one of the heaviest chains holding you in place. Imagine if you could pull back the curtain and see the chaotic, unedited truth behind those perfect stories. What if the straight line you perceive is actually a chaotic scribble of trial, error, heartbreak, and resilience? Is it possible that the people who look the most confident are simply the ones who have gotten better at navigating uncertainty? What if their secret isn't a better map, but better shock absorbers for a bumpy road? Let's dismantle the idea that you are a failure because your life isn't a linear story. Let's expose the fabricated maps that make you feel lost. How can you stop judging your progress against the fake maps of others? Why must you understand that we are all in this fog together, making it up as we go along? Let's prove that nobody has a map, not even the icons whose success seems most inevitable. Let's start by telling the story of a man whose life was not a map, but a minefield of failures. A man who only found his path after a lifetime of wrong turns. Let's talk about Harlan Sanders. When you picture Colonel Sanders today, you see a universally recognized icon. A smiling, grandfatherly figure in a white suit, the face of one of the largest fast food empires on the planet. His life story, when simplified in the retelling, sounds like a brilliant, forward-thinking strategy. It's the inspiring narrative of a man who perfected a recipe and built a global brand. But that clean map is a cartoon drawing, a fabrication created by connecting the dots in reverse. The reality of Harlan Sanders' journey is perhaps the greatest testament in modern history to the fact that the path is never, ever a straight line. For the first 65 years of his life, Harlan Sanders was not a success story. He was a wandering failure. His life was a chaotic series of abandoned careers and spectacular flameouts. He dropped out of school in the 7th grade. He worked as a farmhand. He enlisted in the army and was honorably discharged. He became a railroad fireman, shoveling coal into steam engines. He studied law by correspondence, but his promising legal career was destroyed when he got into a courtroom fistfight with his own client. Each time, he had to start over. He sold life insurance but was fired for insubordination. He started a ferry boat company, which was a moderate success until a new bridge was built, making his business obsolete overnight. He tried his hand at manufacturing acetylene lamps, but his company failed when electric lights became widespread. He then became a tire salesman for Michelin, but he was fired from that job, too. His life was a relentless cycle of trial and error, a series of dead ends and paths that disappeared from under his feet. There was no map. There was only panic, poverty, and a series of unfortunate accidents. In his late 30s, during the Great Depression, he found a small measure of stability running a Shell gas station in Corbin, Kentucky. He was so broke that he and his family lived in the back rooms. Out of sheer desperation to make a few extra dollars, he started cooking for hungry travelers, serving them meals on his own dining table. His verb, the thing he was truly good at, was to cook. But even this was not a straight path. His small restaurant grew, but it was destroyed by a fire. He rebuilt. He perfected his secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices and developed his pressure frying method. He was finally building something. But then, in the 1950s, a new interstate highway was planned, bypassing his town completely. He knew it would be the end of his business. At the age of 65, Harlan Sanders was, by any measure, a complete failure. He was broke, living on a monthly Social Security check of just $105. The successful business he had spent decades building was now worthless. He had no map. He had no path. All he had was a chicken recipe. This is the point where most stories would end. But this is where the real story, the one the simplified maps leave out, truly begins. With nothing left to lose, he put his pressure cooker and his bag of spices in the back of his Ford and started driving. His new plan was absurdly simple. He would visit restaurants, cook his chicken for the owners, and if they liked it, he would make a deal to get a nickel for every piece they sold. He was not seen as a visionary. He was an old man in a strange white suit, sleeping in the back of his car, begging people to try his chicken. He was rejected, not once, not twice, but over 1,000 times. Restaurant owners laughed at him. They told him he was crazy. But he kept going. He learned how to survive a bumpy road, how to take a wrong turn, how to keep going when the engine stalled. And slowly, one franchise at a time, it began to work. The chaotic scribble of his life, full of false starts and painful mistakes, was finally starting to form a picture. He wasn't following a map, he was hacking a path through the wilderness with a cleaver and a pressure cooker. Now, let's look at this myth from the opposite angle. Sanders' story is one of messy, desperate persistence. But what about those whose lives seem so elegant, so curated, so perfectly designed? Let me tell you about a woman who had a perfect map, followed it flawlessly, and then had the courage to throw it away. Let's talk about Vera Wang. For the first 40 years of her life, Vera Wang had a map, and she followed it with fierce discipline. Her first dream was to be an Olympic figure skater. She dedicated her childhood and teenage years to this singular goal, training with relentless intensity. This was her path, her identity. But at the 1968 U.S. Figure Skating Championships, she failed to make the Olympic team. Her map had led to a dead end. Devastated but undeterred, she drew a new one. She pivoted to the world of fashion, landing a job at Vogue magazine right after graduation. And she excelled. Over the next 17 years, she methodically climbed the ladder, eventually becoming one of the magazine's youngest ever senior fashion editors. This was her new path, and she was following it to perfection. She was a woman with direction, intellect, and an incredible career trajectory. But as she approached her 40th birthday, she was passed over for the role of editor-in-chief. Once again, her map had failed her. So she drew a third map. She left Vogue and took a job as a design director for Ralph Lauren. And then, at the age of 40, she got engaged. As she began to shop for a wedding dress, she found herself frustrated. She couldn't find anything that suited her sophisticated, modern taste. The industry was full of overly ornate, traditional dresses. This is where the story pivots from a map to a whisper. Out of personal necessity, not a grand business plan, she did something radical. She sketched her own design and hired a dressmaker to create it for $10,000. It was a simple, elegant gown that broke all the conventional rules. At her wedding, people were captivated by it. That small, personal frustration was an accidental clue, a fortunate accident. Her father saw the opportunity before she did. He encouraged her to start her own business. At the age of 40, an age when many people think their career is set in stone, Vera Wang, the former figure skater and fashion editor, decided to become a bridal gown designer. She had no formal training in design. Her first boutique, opened with her father's backing, was a massive risk. She was not following a map. She was taking a single step into the unknown, guided only by her own taste and a problem she wanted to solve. The perfect, linear maps of her youth, becoming an Olympian, becoming the editor of Vogue, were illusions. Her true path, the one that would make her a global icon, didn't even begin until she was 40. It wasn't born from a 5-year plan, but from a fortunate accident and the courage to take an unconventional risk. Both Colonel Sanders and Vera Wang prove the great secret: nobody has a map. Some people, like Sanders, are just better at surviving 1,000 wrong turns. Others, like Wang, are better at taking a detour and discovering something more interesting. We look at the KFC empire or a Vera Wang gown and we see the final, polished result. We see the clean map, drawn only after the territory has been explored. We don't see the rejections, the lucky breaks, the painful mistakes, and the long periods of feeling hopelessly stuck. As long as you are judging your messy, unedited journey against the fake, curated maps of others, you will remain paralyzed. The feeling of being lost is no longer a sign of your failure, but a sign of your freedom. With no external map to follow, you are finally free to look for a different kind of guide, one that lives deep inside of you. It is time to stop looking for a path and start building a compass. Chapter 3, The First Clue, Listening for Whispers, featuring Julia Child. So where on earth do you begin? How do you take the first step when you are standing in an endless, foggy field with no map? What if the grand, booming voice of purpose you've been waiting for will never arrive? Have you been sold a lie that direction must come like a lightning bolt of passion, illuminating your one true path in a single, brilliant flash? Why do we believe our destiny should be announced with a roar, when for most of us, it doesn't work that way? What if, instead, true direction begins with something infinitely quieter, something you may have been ignoring your entire life? Consider that your path forward begins not with a shout, but with a whisper. What, precisely, is a whisper? Imagine it as that tiny, often illogical, spark of curiosity you can't quite explain. Think of that strange topic you find yourself searching for on the internet late at night when you should be sleeping. Picture the section of the library or bookstore you always seem to drift towards, even if you've never read a book from that shelf. Recall the last conversation where a friend brought up a subject that made you physically lean in a little closer, your ears perking up for reasons you don't quite understand. Acknowledge that quiet little nudge in your gut that simply says, that's interesting. Now, think about how expertly you have been trained to ignore these whispers. How often have you dismissed them as silly, unproductive, or completely irrelevant to your real life? Have you ever had a spark of interest and immediately extinguished it with the thought, I can't make a career out of that? Do you label these profound clues as just weird little hobbies that don't really matter? What if learning to hear and, more importantly, to honor these whispers is the very first step in building your internal compass? How might your life change if you stopped waiting for a passion and started following your curiosity? What if you understood that passion is not the starting point, but the fire that is built, and that curiosity is the kindling, the small, dry stick that can actually catch a spark? Let me tell you a story about a woman who became a global icon, not by following a grand passion, but by honoring one of the quietest, most unexpected whispers imaginable. Let's journey to the middle of the 20th century and meet a woman who, by all accounts, was living a life of serious, important nouns. Let's talk about Julia Child. Before she was a beloved chef, before she was a television personality, before her cheerful voice was recognized by millions, Julia Child worked in the world of international espionage. During World War II, she was a key member of the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. This was not a frivolous life. She wasn't a dilettante searching for a hobby. She was a top-secret research assistant, handling highly classified communications, working directly under the agency's leader. Her job involved developing a shark repellent to protect underwater explosives from curious sharks. Her noun was intelligence officer. It was serious, it was vital, and it was a world away from butter and cream. After the war, she married the love of her life, Paul Child, and moved with him to Paris for his work with the State Department. She was in her mid-30s, living in a foreign country where she didn't speak the language, with no clear career path of her own. She was, in many ways, lost. She was an intelligent, capable woman without a mission. And then came the whisper. It didn't arrive in a dream or as a career plan. It arrived on a plate. On their first day in France, she and Paul stopped for lunch in the city of Rouen. There, she had a meal that would alter the course of her life forever. It began with oysters on the half-shell. Then came the main course, sole meunier, a simple fish cooked in brown butter, parsley, and lemon. It was served with a fine bottle of white wine. For Julia, this was not just lunch. It was an awakening. It was, in her own words, the most exciting meal of my life. The flavors, the textures, the care with which it was prepared, it was a revelation. In that moment, a tiny, quiet spark was lit. It was a whisper that didn't say, "You should become a chef." It didn't say, "This is your new career." It simply said, "That's interesting." It was a profound, illogical, electrifying spark of pure curiosity. For many of us, that's where the story would have ended. We would have enjoyed the meal, told our friends about it, and moved on with our real lives. We would have dismissed the spark as irrelevant. But Julia did something radical. She chose to honor the whisper. She wanted to understand the magic that had happened on that plate. This simple, quiet curiosity became the first breadcrumb on a trail that would lead her to her true self. She took a tiny, manageable step. She enrolled in the world-famous Le Cordon Bleu cooking school. She wasn't trying to become an artist. She was simply following the whisper. She was honoring the small, quiet tug of her own curiosity. Imagine the scene: a tall, 37-year-old American woman who barely spoke French, standing in a class full of younger, serious-minded Frenchmen, all aspiring to be great chefs. She was an outsider. She was a beginner. But she was utterly captivated by the process. She learned to chop onions with precision. She learned the 5 mother sauces of French cuisine. She learned the science and the soul of the craft. She was often clumsy, but she was always curious. Following that first whisper gave her the courage to follow another. She joined a women's culinary club, Le Cercle des Guillemets, where she met Simone Beck and Louisette Berthold. They were in the process of writing a French cookbook for an American audience. Julia's methodical, research-based approach, a remnant of her OSS days, was exactly what they needed. And so, the trail of whispers led her on. A simple lunch led to a cooking class, which led to a friendship, which led to a monumental project, co-authoring the book that would become Mastering the Art of French Cooking. This was not a quick or glamorous process. The book took them a decade to write. It was a painstaking labor of love, testing and retesting recipes until they were foolproof for an American home cook. Their first publisher rejected the manuscript, declaring it too long and encyclopedic. They had to start over. But Julia's curiosity had, over years of dedicated work, finally been forged into a true passion. The fire was now built. When the book was finally published in 1961, it was a sensation. And that led to another whisper, a chance to appear on a local television show to promote the book. Standing in front of a camera, with a hot plate and a whisk, Julia Child came alive. She wasn't polished. She was goofy, authentic, and utterly unpretentious. Her genuine joy for cooking was infectious. The television station was flooded with letters. The whisper of television viewers saying we want more led to her own cooking show, The French Chef, which made her a cultural icon. Her entire, legendary career was an accident. It was the result of a chain reaction started by a single spark of curiosity. She never had a 5-year plan to become a celebrity chef. Her direction didn't arrive with a roar, it began with the whisper of a perfectly cooked fish. She is the ultimate proof that you do not need a grand passion to start. You just need to find one small stick of curiosity that can catch a spark. So now, how do you start listening for your own whispers? You must become a gentle detective of your own life. For the next week, I invite you to take on a simple assignment. Carry a small notebook or use a notes app on your phone. Your only job is to notice and write down your whispers, without any judgment at all. Ask yourself these questions. What topics do you search for online when you have a spare moment? When you walk into a bookstore, which section do you drift towards? In a conversation, what subject makes you lean in and want to hear more? What kind of articles or videos do you find yourself clicking on? Is there a theme? And most importantly, what did you love to do when you were 10 years old, before you were told what was practical or useful? Write everything down, no matter how small, silly, or random it seems. Is it ancient history? The science of sleep? How to fix a bicycle? Baking bread? Dog training? This is not a to-do list. This is not a list of potential careers. This is a collection of clues. You are simply gathering data, mapping the faint glimmers of your own, unique curiosity. These whispers are gentle and they require stillness to be heard. They won't give you the whole answer, but they will always show you the next step. But once you have a collection of these curiosities, you will face a new question. How do you know which whispers to follow more seriously? For that, you need something more solid. You need anchors. And that is what we will discover in the next chapter. Chapter 4, The True Guide, Discovering Your Anchors, featuring Brené Brown. So, you have started to listen. You have a list, perhaps, of those strange, quiet curiosities that have been calling to you from the margins of your life. What do you do, now that you have this collection of whispers? How do you navigate a world of infinite possibility without being pulled in a dozen different directions? Do you follow the whisper about pottery or the one about coding? Have you ever felt that having too many options can lead to a new and more frustrating kind of paralysis? What if the breezes of curiosity are not enough to sail by? Don't you still need something to keep your boat steady in a storm? What if you had a way to filter your choices, a tool that could tell you which path is truly yours? Imagine possessing a rudder and a keel for your life, something that provides stability no matter how fiercely the winds of change may blow. What if this tool already exists deep inside you, waiting to be rediscovered? Consider that to find your way, you don't need a new destination, you need to find your anchors and steer by them. What, then, are these anchors? Know that they are your core values, the deeply held, non-negotiable principles that, for you, define a life of meaning and integrity. Understand that they are not goals to be achieved, but qualities of your journey. Think of them as the how, not the what. Picture words like creativity, security, community, growth, freedom, authenticity. Can you see how feeling lost is often just a symptom of being UN-anchored? Realize that you may be drifting in a life that, while it may look good on the surface, violates your most essential values. What would it feel like to make every choice with a profound sense of inner alignment? How would your life transform if you had a true guide that never lied? What if you learned to navigate not by the shifting opinions of the world, but by the constant, unwavering stars of your own soul? Let me tell you the story of a woman whose entire life's work became a testament to the terrifying, liberating power of living an anchored life. Let's talk about the researcher and storyteller, Brené Brown. To understand her journey, we must first picture her world. Brené began her career not as a public figure, but as a PhD student and a social scientist. Her noun was researcher. This identity came with a strict set of rules. The world of academia, especially in the social sciences, valued what was objective, what could be measured, coded, and analyzed without emotion. The researcher was meant to be a dispassionate observer, standing apart from the messy, unpredictable world of human feeling. Her career path was clear: conduct quantifiable research, publish in academic journals, and climb the ladder of tenure. It was a world of data, not of soul. Her research began in a safe, academically acceptable place: connection. She wanted to understand what makes people feel a sense of belonging and love. For years, she gathered thousands of stories, interviewing people and digging through their experiences. She was a good researcher, methodical and rigorous. But then, her data began to do something deeply inconvenient. As she tried to understand connection, her research kept pointing her toward its opposite. It kept showing her the one thing that unravels connection, the one thing that everyone was afraid to talk about: shame. And as she looked at the people who had a deep sense of worthiness and belonging, she saw that they all had something in common. They talked about vulnerability. They lived with a sense of courage. They were, in a word, authentic. Suddenly, her neat, tidy research on a connection had led her into a swamp of messy, uncomfortable, and professionally dangerous topics. Vulnerability, shame, courage, authenticity, these were not the words that built a respectable academic career. They were seen as soft, the stuff of therapy and self-help, not of serious, data-driven science. She was at a terrifying fork in the road. One path was safe. She could ignore the inconvenient data, focus only on the acceptable parts of her research, and build a successful, conventional career. The other path led directly into the heart of the swamp. It was the path her data, her own curiosity, and a deep sense of truth were calling her to take. but it was a professional risk. She feared her colleagues would dismiss her work, that she would be seen as a New Age quack, and that she would never be taken seriously as a scientist. The external world, the map of academia, was telling her to play it safe. This is the moment where anchors become everything. This choice was not about which path was best in a strategic sense. It was about which path was true. Though she may not have used the word at the time, Brené made her choice by navigating with her anchors. Her first anchor was authenticity. The word itself means to be the author of your own life. Could she, as a researcher, authentically ignore the most powerful and consistent pattern in her data? Could she stand in front of a class or publish a paper knowing she was presenting a polished, incomplete version of the truth? To do so would have been a betrayal of her core identity as a scientist and as a person. The anchor of authenticity held her steady and told her there was only one choice. Her second anchor was courage. Her own research defined courage as the act of telling your story with your whole heart. Here was her data, the story it was begging her to tell. Would she have the courage to speak this truth, even if her voice shook? Would she have the courage to enter the arena and talk about these difficult topics, knowing she would be criticized, or would she stay in the cheap seats, judging and critiquing others while playing it safe? The anchor of courage demanded that she choose the arena. And her third, most powerful anchor was the very topic she was studying, vulnerability. Her data showed that vulnerability, the willingness to show up and be seen when you have no control over the outcome, was the birthplace of joy, creativity, and love. How could she possibly write about the power of vulnerability if she wasn't willing to be vulnerable herself? How could she champion this idea without embodying it? To take the safe path would be an act of profound hypocrisy. The anchor of vulnerability told her she had to live the research. Guided by this constellation of anchors, authenticity, courage, and vulnerability, the choice, while terrifying, became crystal clear. The good academic path was profoundly wrong for her. She chose the swamp. She chose the arena. She chose to put her data, and her heart, out into the world. The result, as we now know, was revolutionary. Her work didn't just find a small audience, it ignited a global conversation. Her TED Talk on vulnerability became one of the most watched talks of all time. Her books became #1 bestsellers. She didn't just find an answer, she created a new one. She built a path that had never existed before, one that blended rigorous research with profound, wholehearted storytelling. She did it by navigating with her anchors, especially when the external maps told her she was going the wrong way. Her story teaches us that feeling lost is often just the symptom of a life lived out of alignment with our anchors. You may have a great job, a beautiful family, and a successful life, but if that life is violating a core value, like Priya the lawyer whose job violated her need for community, or Leo the freelancer whose quest for freedom violated his need for connection, you will feel hollow and lost. So how do you find your anchors? Not the ones you think you should have, but the ones that are truly, authentically yours. I invite you to try a simple but profoundly revealing exercise. Take out a piece of paper or open a new document. Title it My Anchors. First, I want you to think of a peak experience from your life. A specific time when you felt incredibly alive, engaged, and proud of yourself. It could be from work, a personal project, a trip, or a relationship. Don't judge it, just picture it as clearly as you can. Now, write down the words that describe the feeling and the qualities of that moment. What values were being honored? Were you feeling creative? Independent? Connected? Secure? Was it a moment of adventure? Of service? Of peace? Second, think of a valley experience. A time when you felt drained, frustrated, bored, or resentful. A time you thought to yourself, "This is just not me." Picture it clearly. Now, what values were being ignored or violated in that moment? Did you feel constrained when your soul needs freedom? Did you feel isolated when you crave community? Did you feel inauthentic when you value integrity above all else? Write those words down. Do this for 2 peaks and 2 valleys. Now, look at all the words you've written down. You will have a list of your potential anchors. Your job now is to circle the 3 to 5 that feel the most essential, the ones that are absolutely non-negotiable for you. These are the stars in your personal constellation. This is your true guide. These anchors are now the rudder in your compass. The whispers of curiosity show you the many interesting islands you could sail to. Your anchors are what help you choose the course that is true for you. When faced with a choice, you no longer have to ask, "What is the best option?" You can now ask, "Which option is most in line with my anchors?" We now have the whispers to give us ideas and the anchors to give us direction. We have the core components of our internal compass. But a compass is useless if it just sits in a box. The final step is learning how to use it to brave the wilderness, one step at a time. It's time to talk about the art of the small experiment. Chapter 5: The Scientist of Your Own Life, The Power of Experiments, featuring Sir James Dyson. We have arrived at a hopeful place, have we not? What does it feel like to hold the first pieces of your own internal compass? How does it feel to know you have the whispers of your curiosity and the anchors of your core values? Can you feel the fog beginning to thin, and the solid ground of your own truth beneath your feet? And yet, what happens now? Why does this moment, the moment of movement, so often feel like the most difficult part of the entire journey? What is this terrifying gap that lies between knowing and doing? Do you see the path, but find your feet are frozen to the ground? Is the thought of making a big change, quitting a job, going back to school, starting a business, so enormous and so risky that it sends you right back into a state of paralysis? Does the fear of making the one wrong move keep you from making any move at all? What if you didn't have to make a big move? What if you didn't need a perfect 5-year plan to start? Imagine if, instead of being a grand architect of your life, trying to design the entire skyscraper before laying a single brick, you could become a gentle scientist in the laboratory of your own existence. Could this one simple shift in mindset be the key that unlocks everything? How does a scientist truly work? Does a scientist start with a conclusion? No, a scientist starts with a question, a hypothesis, and then runs an experiment to gather data. Why is this approach so powerful? Because the goal isn't to be right, the goal is simply to learn. What if you adopted this mindset, freeing yourself from the crushing pressure of success or failure? How would it feel to know that you are no longer making a life-altering decision, but simply running a small test to see what happens? Let me show you how this powerful mindset shift, the art of the small experiment, is responsible for one of the most iconic inventions in modern history. Let's talk about the relentless, methodical, and brilliant scientist of his own life, Sir James Dyson. Today, the name Dyson is synonymous with innovation, sleek design, and high performance. When we see his vacuum cleaners, fans, and hair dryers, we see the finished product. We see the result of a brilliant idea executed to perfection. We see, in other words, the clean and polished map. But to truly understand the power of experimentation, we must travel back in time and stand with James Dyson in the messy, chaotic, and frustrating laboratory of his own life. In the late 1970s, James Dyson was an engineer and designer with a growing family. His noun was inventor. He had achieved some success, but he was about to encounter a problem that would define the next 15 years of his life. It was not a grand industrial problem. It was a simple, domestic frustration. His vacuum cleaner, the top-of-the-line model at the time, was constantly getting clogged and losing suction. The bag would fill with dust, the machine's pores would get blocked, and its performance would plummet. It was an infuriatingly inefficient design, and it offended his engineer's soul. This was the whisper. It wasn't a call to build a global empire. It was the quiet, persistent nudge that said, there has to be a better way. One day, while visiting a local sawmill, he noticed how the mill used a giant, industrial cyclonic separator, a 30-foot cone that spun dust out of the air at incredible speeds to maintain a clean environment. Another whisper. An idea from a completely different world. His hypothesis was born: I believe I can use the principle of cyclonic separation to create a vacuum cleaner that doesn't need a bag and never loses suction. Now, if Dyson had been a grand architect, he would have spent months trying to create a perfect, detailed blueprint. He would have tried to solve every problem on paper before building anything. He would have been paralyzed by the sheer complexity of shrinking a 30-foot industrial tower into a domestic appliance. But Dyson was not an architect. He was a scientist. He knew the only way to find the answer was to run an experiment. His first experiment was beautifully simple and beautifully clumsy. He took his old vacuum cleaner, ripped the bag off, and crudely taped on a cardboard cyclone he had built. He turned it on. It was a monstrously ugly creation, but it worked, sort of. It picked up more dust than the original machine. This was not a failure. This was not a success. This was his first piece of invaluable data. The data said, hypothesis is plausible, but the execution is flawed. This is where the real story begins, the story that the polished maps of success always leave out. The first experiment led to a second, and a second to a third. He began building prototypes, not to create a final product, but to answer specific questions. What is the optimal angle for the cone? Let's build 5 different cones and test them. How do I handle fine particles of dust? Let's design a second, smaller cyclone that spins even faster. He was not making a series of life-altering decisions. He was simply running a series of small, manageable tests to see what would happen. This process was not quick. It was not easy. It was a grueling, 15-year odyssey of experimentation. Over the course of those years, he built 5,126 prototypes. Let that number sink in. 5,126 experiments that, from the outside, looked like failures. His wife, a teacher, was supporting their family with her modest salary. He went deep into debt. He was working in the coach house behind his home, a man obsessed with a seemingly impossible idea. He would build a prototype, test it, and it would fail. But Dyson, the scientist, reframed the meaning of failure. Each broken or inefficient prototype was not a step backward. It was a successful experiment that taught him what not to do. It was a piece of data that informed the next iteration. He would famously say, I learned from each one. That's how I came to the solution. So I don't mind failure. He had mastered the art of the experiment, where the goal isn't to be right, but simply to learn. After 5 years and thousands of prototypes, he finally had it. The first working, backless vacuum cleaner. But the experiments were not over. When he tried to license his invention to the major vacuum manufacturers, he was universally rejected. Companies like Hoover had built their entire business model on selling replacement vacuum bags. His invention would destroy their profits. They were not interested in his map because it led to a different destination. So he had to run a new set of experiments. Can I manufacture this myself? Can I find a market for it in a different country? He finally found a company in Japan that was intrigued by his design. The bright pink G-Force cleaner sold for $2,000 in Japan and became a status symbol. The data was in. There is a market for a high-performance, premium vacuum cleaner. That success gave him the capital to run his biggest experiment yet, launching his own manufacturing company in the UK. Finally, in 1993, the Dyson DC-01 was launched. It was the result of 15 years and 5,126 experiments. James Dyson didn't find his purpose by creating a grand plan. He built it, one small, methodical, often frustrating experiment at a time. This approach works for everything, not just for inventions. It works for finding a career, for building a relationship, for changing who you are. A good life experiment has 3 qualities. First, it is small and low risk. It shouldn't cost a fortune or require you to burn your current life to the ground. Second, it is practical. It is something you can actually do in the next few weeks. Third, it is designed to answer a specific question. So now, it is your turn. It is time to become the scientist of your own life. I invite you to design your very first experiment. First, look at the list of whispers you created. Pick just one that feels intriguing right now. Second, look at your list of anchors. How does this whisper connect to one of your core values? Third, formulate a clear, simple question you want to answer. Not, is this my destiny, but am I interested enough to learn more? And fourth, design a small, low-risk, practical experiment you can conduct in the next month. Is your whisper about writing? Your question could be, do I enjoy the process of writing when no one is watching? Your experiment, write for 15 minutes every morning for 2 weeks. Don't show it to anyone. The only goal is to collect the data on how it feels. Is your whisper about music? Your question could be, do I enjoy the feeling of trying to make music on a new instrument? Your experiment, book a single, introductory guitar lesson. 1 hour. Low cost, low risk. You are not committing to becoming a musician, you are just gathering data. Is your whisper about helping others? Your question could be, what kind of volunteering environment gives me the most energy? Your experiment, sign up for 1-day volunteer shifts at 3 different organizations. An animal shelter, a soup kitchen, and an environmental cleanup. The goal of this first experiment is not to change your life. The goal is to get in motion. It is to trade fear and speculation for action and data. You now have a complete compass in your hands. The whispers point you towards what is interesting. The anchors help you stay true to what is important. And the experimental mindset gives you a safe, powerful way to start walking. But even with the most perfect compass, that first step out of the familiar and into the unknown can be the most difficult one of all. It requires a final ingredient. It requires the courage to begin, even if you begin badly. And that is where our journey will go next. Chapter 6, Permission to Begin Badly, featuring Steven Spielberg. Here you are, standing at the edge of the fog, are you not? In your hand, you now hold the compass of your own making. Can you feel its weight, the solid reality of your whispers and your anchors? Do you see the first few feet of your path, the small, clever experiment you have designed, emerging from the mist? And yet, do you hesitate? What is that familiar, sharp voice that speaks from the back of your mind at this very moment? Does it tell you you're not ready yet? Does it insist you need to do more research, you need a better plan? Does it whisper that you'll probably fail anyway, so why even bother trying? What is this force that masquerades as a wise advisor, a guardian of high standards, but is actually a prison guard, whose only job is to keep you safely locked inside the cell of inaction? Why do we wait for the perfect moment to start, when deep down we know the perfect moment never comes? What is the one gift, the one key, that can finally unlock that cell door? Consider that the only way to break free is to give yourself the most powerful gift imaginable, permission to begin badly. How can we dismantle this final barrier, this last great myth that we must be competent, confident, and polished before we even begin? Have you been taught to believe that your first attempt must be a good attempt? Do you feel that your first painting must be a masterpiece, your first business plan must be flawless, your first speech must be inspiring? What if this single belief is the primary reason so many brilliant dreams die in the silence of our own minds? How can you finally accept that perfectionism is not about excellence, but is a shield we use to protect ourselves from the perceived shame of being a beginner? Why is it so terrifying to be seen as clumsy, foolish, or inadequate? And what if I told you that clumsiness is the unavoidable, non-negotiable price of admission to any new skill, any new venture, any new way of being? Let me tell you a story about a young man who was told by the world's most powerful gatekeepers that he wasn't good enough, and how his willingness to begin badly changed the world of cinema forever. Let's talk about Steven Spielberg. Long before the name Spielberg was synonymous with movie magic, he was just a kid in the suburbs with a whisper. It was the whisper of celluloid, the flicker of light through a projector, the irresistible urge to capture stories. His verb, from his earliest days, was to direct. By the age of 12, he was making 8mm adventure films with his friends. By 16, he had completed a full-length, 2.5-hour science fiction film called Firelight, which he screened at his local movie theater. He was not just curious, he was consumed. His path seemed so clear, so obvious. He was going to be a filmmaker. And in the 1960s, if you were a serious aspiring filmmaker, there was one golden path, one perfect map. It led directly to the gates of the University of Southern California, the prestigious USC School of Cinematic Arts. This was the institution, the Mecca for filmmakers. It was the place that could anoint you, that could give you the skills, the connections, and most importantly, the validation that you were a real director. So, with a portfolio of his amateur films, his heart full of dreams, and his path seemingly laid out before him, Spielberg applied. He waited, knowing this was the next logical step on his map. And then the letter came. He was rejected. His grades weren't good enough. His application, despite his obvious passion, was denied. The gatekeepers of his dream had looked at him and said, no. For most, this would be a devastating blow. A sign that maybe this wasn't the right path. But Spielberg was relentless. He tried again. He submitted another application. He waited. And once again, he was rejected. The door to the perfect path was not just closed, it was bolted shut. Years later, after he had become one of the most successful directors of all time, he would try a third time, just to see if he could finally get in. He was rejected again. Think about the weight of that rejection. It wasn't just a no. It was an institutional judgment. It was the world's most respected authority on filmmaking telling him he did not have what it takes. His map was in tatters. The perfect, linear path he had envisioned was an illusion. This is the moment where the voice of perfectionism screams the loudest. See? I told you. You're not good enough. People will think you're foolish for even trying. Just give up. But Steven Spielberg did not give up. He gave himself permission to begin badly. If the perfect path was closed to him, he would find an imperfect one. He enrolled at the nearby, far less prestigious, California State University, Long Beach. It was a practical choice, but it was not his dream. And it's what he did next that holds the most profound lesson for all of us. He refused to let his bad beginning define him. He started visiting Universal Studios. He didn't have a pass. He wasn't an intern. He didn't have an invitation. He took the studio tour bus, and when it stopped for a bathroom break, he simply got off and didn't get back on. He spent the rest of the day wandering the lot, watching directors work, observing the rhythm of a real movie set, soaking in the atmosphere. The next day, he came back. Dressed in a suit and carrying his father's briefcase with nothing but a sandwich and 2 candy bars inside, he strode past the security guard at the gate and confidently waved. The guard waved back. And just like that, he was in. For the entire summer, Steven Spielberg, the 3-time USC reject, became an unofficial, unpaid, and completely invisible fixture at Universal Studios. This was the ultimate bad beginning. He had no title. He had no permission. He had no polished credentials. He was just a young man with a passion, showing up. He found an empty office and put his name on the door. He spent his days observing, learning, and talking to directors, writers, and editors. He was clumsy. He was an imposter. But he was there. He was in motion. During this time, he made a short film called Amblin. It was a 26-minute, professional-looking film about a boy and a girl hitchhiking across the desert, made on a shoestring budget. It was his calling card. It was his real-world thesis. And when he finally got it in front of a Universal executive, it was this film, the product of his messy, unofficial, bad beginning, that changed everything. They didn't ask to see his grades. They didn't ask for a diploma from USC. They saw the work. And they were stunned. In 1969, Universal Studios signed 22-year-old Steven Spielberg to a 7-year directing contract, making him one of the youngest directors ever to be signed to a major studio. His imperfect, audacious, clumsy beginning was infinitely more valuable and impactful than a perfect, UN-taken spot at film school. He had to begin badly to ever have a chance of becoming good. He learned the most profound lesson: the world doesn't respond to your perfect plans, it responds to your imperfect actions. This applies to everything. The fear of being a beginner is almost always the fear of being judged. We imagine a crowd of critics, watching our every move, ready to point out our flaws. But the truth is, most people are not watching you. They are living inside their own heads, worrying about their own lives, and wrestling with their own insecurities. And even if a few people do judge, why does their opinion hold so much power? Are you willing to grant a stranger, or even a friend, veto power over your own growth and your own aliveness. Giving yourself permission to begin badly is a radical act of self-compassion. It is the understanding that you are worthy of growth, even before you are skilled. It is the acceptance that the path to mastery is paved with mistakes. It is the courage to show up as you are, not as you think you should be. So look at that small experiment you designed in the last chapter. Look at that first, simple step. I am now officially giving you permission to do it badly. I am giving you permission for your first painting to be ugly. For your first blog post to have typos. For your first attempt at meditating to be a mess of distracting thoughts. For your first conversation in a new language to be clumsy and full of errors. I'm giving you permission to be a C- student on your first try. Your goal is not a perfect outcome. Your goal is simply to begin. Because the path is not something you find. It is something you create. And it is only ever created by walking. Steven Spielberg didn't need a diploma from USC. He just needed to pick up a camera. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to take the first, clumsy, essential step. Chapter 7: The Path is Made by Walking, featuring Steve Jobs. And so, we arrive at the end of our time together, but at the true beginning of your journey. What if the entire search for a pre-existing path has been the very thing keeping you lost? Have we not been taught our whole lives to look for a road that someone else has paved for us? Could the great secret be that the path does not exist until we take a step? Imagine if purpose is not a treasure you discover locked away in a chest, but a shelter that you build, piece by piece, with your own hands. What would it mean if meaning is not something you find, but something you make? How would you live differently if you knew, with absolute certainty, that every small experiment, every bad beginning, every courageous choice is not just a step on the path, but is the path itself? Consider the possibility that you are not a lost searcher, but a powerful creator. Realize that the path will not always be clear, for it is you, with your own choices, who must clear it. Understand that to stumble is not to fail, it is merely to learn the texture of the world beneath you. Know this: you are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be. Could it be that your life is not a problem to be solved, but an adventure to be lived? Why have we been taught to wait for a grand revelation, when a life of meaning is built in 1,000 small, courageous moments? Let us now embrace the final, liberating truth: the path is made by walking. What if your life is not a race to a finish line, but an art of beautiful, imperfect steps? How much pressure would dissolve if you truly believed there is no right path, only your path? Can you feel the power in this single idea? See now that you are not meant to follow a map, but to become a good walker. Release the need for applause from the crowd, and learn to listen for the quiet nod of approval from your own soul. Let this be the moment where you stop waiting for your life to begin and recognize that you are, and always have been, the one who creates it. And so, here is the final story, one that perfectly illustrates this profound truth, a story about the power of taking a seemingly random, illogical step, and trusting that, somehow, the dots will connect. Let's talk about Steve Jobs. To understand the most important lesson from Steve Jobs' life, we must look past the black turtleneck, past the iconic product launches, and past the myth of the infallible visionary. We must go back to 1972, to a young, lost, and deeply uncertain 18-year-old on the campus of Reed College in Oregon. He was the adopted son of working-class parents who were spending their entire life savings on his tuition. The weight of their sacrifice was immense. He was on the perfect, pre-approved path: get a good education, get a good job. But within 6 months, he knew it was a profound mistake. He had no idea what he wanted to do with his life, and he could see no value in a college education that was draining his parents' life savings. So he made his first truly radical decision. He dropped out. This was not a strategic move. This was a bad beginning. It was an act of terrifying uncertainty. He had no plan. He had no map. He was, by his own admission, scared. He gave up his dorm room and started sleeping on the floor in friends' rooms. He returned Coke bottles for 5-cent deposits to buy food. He walked 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the local Hare Krishna temple. From the outside, his life was a failure. He had abandoned the one great opportunity he had been given. But in dropping out, he also gave himself a gift, the freedom to be curious. No longer bound by the required classes of a formal degree, he was free to follow his whispers. He could now drop in on any class that seemed interesting. And one of them, a class he had no practical reason to take, was calligraphy. Reed College at that time was renowned for having the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer, was beautifully hand calligraphed. It was an environment of artistry and precision. The whisper was purely aesthetic. He was captivated by the beauty of it. By the serifs and sans-serif typefaces, by the art of varying the space between different letter combinations, by what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, and artistically subtle in a way that science couldn't capture. This was a profoundly impractical step. This whisper had zero promise of any practical application in his life. It was 1972. Personal computers did not exist. This was not a career move. It was not a skill that would look good on a resume. It was an act of pure, unadulterated curiosity. He was honoring a whisper for its own sake, with no expectation of a reward. He was taking a single, authentic step into a wilderness of his own interest. And for 10 years, that's all it was, a single, beautiful, useless dot in his past. After his time at Reed, his path remained a chaotic scribble. He traveled to India seeking enlightenment. He returned to California and, with his friend Steve Wozniak, started Apple in his parents' garage. The company grew with explosive speed. But the path was still not a straight line. He was famously forced out of the very company he had created. He experienced profound, public failure. He was, once again, lost. But then came the moment. The moment that proves the truth that the path is made by walking. After leaving Apple, he started a new company, Next. And as he and his team were designing the first Next computer, which would later become the foundation for the return of Apple, he had an epiphany. He wanted this new machine to be beautiful. He wanted it to have a soul. And he realized that part of that soul would be how it presented information. It needed beautiful typography. And suddenly, it all came back to him. The calligraphy class. The serifs and sans-serifs. The proportional spacing. All the knowledge from that useless class he took 10 years earlier came flooding back. And he built it into the core of the computer. The Macintosh, when it was later created, would be the first computer with beautiful, elegant typography. It was a feature that captivated the world and set Apple apart forever. If he had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. This is the lesson. As he would famously say in his Stanford commencement speech, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. You have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. Steve Jobs could never, ever have planned that path from his 18-year-old vantage point. There was no map that could have told him that a random calligraphy class would one day revolutionize the personal computer. The path did not exist until he walked it. It was made of a series of authentic, curious, and often terrifying steps. His purpose wasn't a location he had to find. It was the very act of walking in a direction that felt true, and the path simply rose up to meet his feet. And so we come back to you. Here. Now. Your life is not a problem to be solved. It is a story to be written, a path to be made. The confusion you felt, the feeling of being lost, was never a weakness. It was the stirring of your own soul, asking for a more authentic life. It was a call to begin. Forget about finding the right path. There is no right path. There is only your path. The one you make with your own choices, your own courage, and your own beautiful, imperfect steps. Trust the whispers, just as Julia Child trusted a single meal and Steve Jobs trusted a beautiful poster. Hold fast to your anchors, just as Brené Brown held fast to courage and authenticity. Embrace the spirit of the experiment, just as Sir James Dyson embraced 5,126 prototypes. Give yourself permission to begin badly, just as Steven Spielberg did when he walked, uninvited, onto a movie set. And then, take a step. Any step. Take a class. Write one page. Make that phone call. Go for that walk. This is how a life of meaning is built. Not in a single, grand revelation, but in 1,000 small, courageous moments of showing up. Your life is waiting for you. Not in some distant future when everything is figured out, but here. Now. In your next breath, and your next choice. The fog has cleared. The compass is in your hand. Look down at your feet, feel the solid ground beneath you, and know that you are exactly where you need to be. The true work begins, not with a grand map, but with this single, courageous step. Now, go and walk your path. Chapter 8, The Art of the Stumble, Navigating the Inevitable Storm, featuring Walt Disney. What happens after the beginning? What comes after you've taken that first, courageous, clumsy step onto your new path? Do you imagine that the fog, once cleared, stays clear forever? Have you secretly hoped that once you find your compass, the journey ahead will be a smooth and gentle incline? Why is it that we so often believe that finding our way means we will never be lost again? What if I told you that the path made by walking is not a paved road, but a wild and unpredictable trail? What happens on the day you take a step, and the ground gives way beneath your feet? What do you do when your first bad beginning feels less like a noble start and more like a foolish mistake? How do you handle the moment your brilliant experiment yields the data you dreaded most? This isn't working. Why does a stumble feel so much like a final verdict on our worthiness? Does the voice of shame whisper in your ear, "I told you so"? You should have stayed where it was safe? How do you resist the powerful, gravitational pull to retreat to the familiar life you left behind? What if the stumble is not the end of the path, but an essential part of its creation? Could it be that our greatest heroes are not defined by their ability to avoid failure, but by their artful response to it? Is it possible that the fall itself holds a lesson that the smooth path never could? Imagine if you could learn to see failure not as a stop sign, but as a crucial, if painful, redirection. What if resilience is not a trait you are born with, but a skill you can learn? Let us now explore the most advanced, most necessary lesson for any true walker, the art of the stumble. How can you learn to fail well? What does it take to get back up, not just once, but again and again? To understand this, let me tell you the story of a man whose dreams were repeatedly crushed into dust, and who, from that very dust, built an empire of joy. Let's talk about Walt Disney. The story we all know is the story of success, Mickey Mouse, Disneyland, a global legacy of imagination. We see the final, triumphant destination. But the myth of the map hides the most important part of his journey, the catastrophic, soul-crushing failures he endured after he had already started walking his path. Picture a young Walt Disney in his early 20s in Kansas City. He has found his verb, to animate. It is a whisper that has become a roar. He is consumed by the magic of bringing drawings to life. In 1921, he follows his path with a courageous, bad beginning. He starts his first company, Laughogram Studio. He gathers a team of young, brilliant animators. They are pioneers, creating clever animated shorts based on fairy tales. He is walking his path. He is living his dream. And then, the ground gives way. The New York-based company that distributes his films goes bankrupt without paying him. The money is gone. The studio's cash flow dries up. Walt scrambles, taking any small job he can to keep the lights on. He works so hard and eats so little that he and his team are forced to survive on beans. He eventually takes on a side project, a film combining a live-action girl with animated characters called Alice's Wonderland. But it is too little, too late. The debt is overwhelming. The dream is over. At the age of 22, Walt Disney is forced to declare bankruptcy. His first company, the vessel for his life's passion, is a complete and utter failure. His talented team is scattered. He is left with nothing but a single copy of Alice's Wonderland, a suitcase, and a train ticket to California. This was not a small stumble. This was a public, humiliating collapse. The fog had not just returned, it had become a hurricane. The shame and despair were so profound that he was on the verge of abandoning animation altogether, considering a safer career as a live-action director. This is the first lesson in the art of the stumble. Failure is a moment of profound vulnerability where your commitment to your verb is tested. Walt could have given up. He could have concluded that his verb, to animate, was an impractical fantasy. But on that long train ride to California, a flicker of the whisper remained. He still had that one film in his suitcase. He decided to run one more experiment. He arrived in Hollywood and, with his loyal brother Roy, started again. This was not a triumphant arrival, it was a desperate one. They founded the Disney Brothers Studio, using their uncle's garage as their first workspace. They managed to sell the idea for the Alice comedies, and for a time, they found stability. The path reappeared. He then created a new, all-animated character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The character was a huge hit. The studio was growing. It seemed the failure in Kansas City was just a painful memory. He had stumbled, but he had recovered. And then came the second fall, a fall so brutal it would have destroyed almost anyone. In 1928, Walt traveled to New York to negotiate a new contract with his distributor, Charles Mintz. He believed he was going to ask for a bigger budget. Instead, he was met with a devastating ultimatum. Mintz had secretly gone behind his back and hired away most of his animation staff. And because of a clause in the contract, Mintz, not Disney, owned the rights to the character of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Mintz informed Walt that he was taking over the character, taking over the staff, and that if Walt didn't agree to a massive pay cut, the Disney studio would be finished. Imagine the absolute shock of this betrayal. This was not just a business failure, this was a theft. The character he had created, the team he had nurtured, the path he had painstakingly rebuilt, it was all stolen from him in an instant. He had been outmaneuvered and utterly defeated. He refused Mintz's offer and walked away with nothing. He had to send a telegram back to his brother Roy with the terrible news: they had lost everything. Again. This is the second, more advanced lesson in the art of the stumble. Sometimes, the path is not just blocked, it is obliterated. This was a failure far worse than the first. It was a failure born of betrayal. The temptation to become bitter, to quit, to build a wall around his heart must have been immense. The long train ride back from New York to California was the crucible of his life. He was returning home a failure again. He had to tell the few remaining staff members that the work was gone. The studio was on the brink of collapse. The fog was absolute. But on that train, in the depths of his despair, Walt Disney performed one of the greatest acts of creative resilience in history. He had lost Oswald. But he knew they couldn't take what was in his mind. He took out a piece of paper. He started to sketch. He drew a mouse. A simple character with big, round ears. A character he named Mortimer, though his wife Lillian would later convince him to change it to Mickey. This is the core of the art of the stumble, the ability to metabolize pain into fuel. Failure can either be the poison that makes you bitter, or it can be the fertilizer that makes you grow. Walt chose to let it be fertilizer. The humiliation of losing Oswald did not make him quit, it made him create. He channeled all the pain, all the anger, all the fear, into a new act of creation. He resolved, in that moment, that he would never again work on a character that he did not own outright. The failure was not a stop sign. It was a navigation lesson. It taught him a brutal but invaluable lesson about business and ownership. It forced him to dig deeper, to find a character that was even more personal, more filled with his own optimistic spirit. Mickey Mouse was not born in a moment of triumph. He was born on a train ride of utter defeat. He was a creature born from the ashes of a dead dream. When you walk your new path, you will stumble. Your first business may fail. Your manuscript may be rejected. Your new career may have a rocky start. In those moments, you will have a choice. You can see the stumble as a final verdict, a confirmation of your inadequacy. Or you can see it as Walt did, as a painful, but powerful, piece of data. You can ask, what is this failure here to teach me? Perhaps the failure of your first business will teach you about cash flow, a lesson you needed to learn to make your second business a success. Perhaps the rejection of your manuscript will force you to dig deeper into your story, to make it truer and more powerful. The stumble is not a judgment. It is part of the curriculum of your life. The path is not just made by walking. It is remade by getting back up. It is fortified by the lessons learned from the fall. The person who has never failed is not strong, they are untested. True strength is forged in the fire of getting back up, of starting again, of sketching a new mouse on a train ride home from a disaster. So when you stumble, and you will, remember the story of Walt Disney. Remember that your greatest creations may be waiting for you on the other side of your greatest failures. Do not be afraid of the fall. See it for what it is, an essential, powerful, and transformative part of the beautiful, messy, and glorious art of walking your path. Conclusion: the walker and the path. And so, here we are, at the end of one journey, but at the true beginning of yours. What have we truly learned, standing together here at the edge of the clearing? Can you now see the question, what should I do with my life, not as a verdict to be passed, but as a compass to be built? Do you finally understand that the feeling of being lost was never a weakness, but the stirring of your own soul asking for a more authentic life? Remember the feeling of being alone in the fog, convinced that everyone else held a secret map. Forget the idea that such a map ever existed for anyone. Embrace the truth that the most beautiful lives are not followed, but forged. Know that you are not a searcher, lost in the wilderness, you are a creator, standing before an open field. See your life not as a linear race to be won, but as a grand story to be written. Understand that your whispers are not distractions, but the first breadcrumbs on the trail that leads back to you. Recognize that your anchors are not limitations, but the unwavering stars in your personal constellation, your true guide. Trust that your experiments are not gambles, but the sacred data gathering of a scientist in the laboratory of your own existence. Accept that your bad beginnings are not signs of incompetence, but the non-negotiable price of admission to any new and worthy adventure. Believe that your stumbles are not failures, but the curriculum of your life, teaching you the texture of the world beneath you. What did the story of Henry Ford teach you about abandoning a safe noun for a powerful verb? How did the journey of Colonel Sanders prove that there is no such thing as being too late? Why must you remember Vera Wang's story when you feel your path needs an accidental pivot? Can you feel the power of Julia Child's whisper, born from a single, perfect meal? How will Brené Brown's story remind you to live an anchored life of courage? What will you do differently, knowing that Sir James Dyson's 5,126 failures were actually successful experiments? How will Steven Spielberg's rejection inspire you to create your own path when the main gate is closed? What will you build from the ashes of your own failures, just as Walt Disney sketched a mouse on a train ride of defeat? Can you see now how Steve Jobs proved that the most impractical steps can become the foundation of your greatest work? Let this be the moment you stop waiting for your life to begin and recognize that you are, and always have been, the one who creates it. Will you now choose to be the author of your days? How will you walk differently tomorrow, knowing these truths? What is the one, small, imperfect step you will take when this audio ends? Do not mistake the trembling in your hands for weakness, it is the raw feeling of your own power returning. Look down at your feet, feel the solid ground beneath you, and know with every fiber of your being that you are ready. To leave you with one final image, let me tell you the story of a master artisan, renowned throughout the lands for creating the most beautiful and intricate maps imaginable. Explorers and kings sought her out, believing her charts held the key to navigating the world. One day, a young student, who had spent his life feeling lost and adrift, finally gained an audience with her. "Master," he said, his voice filled with a hopeful tremor, "I have seen your maps of faraway lands. But please, could you show me your greatest work? The map of your own life, the one you follow to become who you are." The old master smiled. She didn't point to a pristine, gilded parchment on the wall. Instead, she gestured to a small, worn, leather-bound book on her workbench. She opened it for him. The pages were not a clean, linear map, but a beautiful, chaotic mess of sketches, notes, and crossed-out lines. There were drawings of paths that led to dead ends, observations about unexpected discoveries made on detours, and on one page, a detailed, loving drawing of a simple, sturdy boot. The student was confused. "This is not a map," he said. "It is a journal of your wanderings." "Exactly," the master replied, her eyes twinkling with a deep and ancient wisdom. "I never had a map. My life's work was not to follow a path, but to become a good walker. I learned to pay attention, to trust my footing, and to appreciate the view wherever I found myself. I only drew the map after the journey was underway." You are both the student and the master. You hold the pen. The journey ahead is yours to chart, not by finding a pre-drawn line, but by having the courage to walk, to learn, and to create the path as you go. If these stories and this time together have provided you with a compass, I now invite you to become a lighthouse for others. The journey of a walker can be a solitary one, but it doesn't have to be. Here are 3 ways you can help illuminate the path for the next person who finds themselves in the fog. First, like and leave a comment. Your honest review is a lighthouse. It doesn't just help others decide if this journey is right for them, it signals to the wider world that a conversation about living with intention is worth having. Your words can be the beacon that helps someone else find this shore. Second, subscribe or follow for your ongoing journey. Think of subscribing not just as a way to get content, but as a commitment to keeping your own compass calibrated. It is your personal anchor point, a place you can return to be reminded of these truths whenever the winds of doubt begin to blow. And finally, share this with another walker. You know someone who is navigating their own wilderness right now. Sharing this audiobook with them is more than just a recommendation, it is an act of profound empathy. It is like handing a compass to a fellow traveler and saying, "I see you. You are not alone. Let's walk together." Thank you for the honor of your time. The world does not need you to be perfect. It only needs you to show up. You have your compass. You have your courage. You are ready. Now, go and create your path.